How come no one has done Whitey Bulger? He seems to be involved in every crime in the city, and yet the Bureau keeps saying he's clean. It's only when another agency has an informant that I hear maybe Whitey isn't so squeaky clean.
Well, I hear that he's very careful. He doesn't use phones, that kind of stuff. And, who did you say these other informants were?
I didn't.
Listen, from what I hear, his criminal days are all but over. His partner and him, they gone legit.
Christ, Connolly. Is Whitey never using phones and careful, or is Whitey retired?
I'm not in my office. These are things that I hear. I don't know if all of them are true.
Do your job and find out.
Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone and Joel Clark for another episode of our gangster movie show that we've been doing. We don't have a name for it yet, but we will soon. It's been difficult to come up with one. And today we're doing Black Mass. Black Mass is a 2015 film starring Johnny Depp. It's about how the FBI agent John Connolly forms an alliance with the ruthless crime boss Whitey Bulger against the Italian mafia in Boston. It's a lot more to the movie than that, but that's the sort of the quick synopsis of it. Again, this came out in 2015. I don't quite know what this movie's legacy is yet, so I don't know if this is like a movie that people still remember that well, or if it's already become a classic, or if it's one of these crime movies that just got forgotten about. But yeah. So, what was was this your first time watching this, guys, or have you guys seen this film before?
It's weird.
First time. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I thought it was my first time, but then I was watching a few of the scenes about the middle of the movie, and I don't know if I walked in on someone else watching it and just kind of sat down. But I knew it was going to happen before it happened. I was like, oh, I remember this.
I bet you saw because the trailer, they played two scenes in the trailer straight through instead of doing like a trailer where they flip through all of different sequences really quickly. They played the scene at the dinner table where he's talking about the secret family recipe, and they played
that one I saw before.
Okay, and the scene with his son, when he's telling his son like you got in trouble because people saw you.
But no, I remembered that scene distinctly because back before I was on the Do It Any podcast, I was following you on social media and you linked it, and I was like, oh, so I was like, you actually introduced me.
Okay, to that. I do remember I did post about this movie because I was very excited when it was coming out. I remember that. And so I saw it on demand when it first came out on. Like, I didn't go to the movies and see it, but I saw it when it first came out on demand. And I might have even done the thing where I saw it like while it was still in theaters and paid the extra money. I can't remember if they were doing that at the time. But Adam, what about you?
What's the question again?
Did you guys see this movie? Was this your first time seeing this?
This was my first time watching it. Okay. Aside from that one, the dinner trailer was the trailer I saw. Okay. That's all I'd seen of this movie.
So then that leads to, what did you guys think of the movie?
I liked the movie. I felt it was rushed a little. I felt like if this was like a one-season premium cable show, it would have been fantastic. Everything about it was good, but there's so many characters just kind of come and go. It's like Bulger's wife. It's like, well, she's like fairly prominent in the beginning of the movie, then she's just gone. She disappears. The first character you meet, Jesse Plemons' character, it's like, oh, I feel like he's going to be important. And no, he's pretty much invisible for the entire movie, even when he's in a scene.
He's kind of our eyes into the movie, right? Like that's
yeah. But I liked it. It's good. It was kind of a case of I wish there was more of this, really, because I'm enjoying what's here, and we'll get into comparing more with our last movie, but I'll get into that later. But you go ahead and give your opinion here, Joel.
Oh yeah, okay. So I generally agree with you. I liked what was there, and I don't know that there wasn't enough of it. I almost felt like there was too much, and we were just sort of getting like we were riding the crests of all the waves.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Because I think we were talking before the podcast, so this is a long movie. Like this is like a 2-hour plus movie. It's quite a trip, and it's really comprehensive. It follows Whitey Bulger's basically his entire career from like a small time guy all the way up to 2011 when he's finally apprehended by the feds. So it's pretty illustrious career for what it is, and that's a lot. You're talking about like,
Well, and actually, we're not even getting all of his career because he had an earlier criminal
Yeah.
past prior to this.
Yeah,
They
oh,
just
yeah.
Alcatraz by
Yeah.
the time we meet him. So
Yep. So yeah, and we get the highlights of that, and there's a lot in a life, in any life, and this guy's life was quite full of horrible things.
yeah,
So really, the impression is one of like almost like synaptic overload,
Mm.
because like it feels unbelievable that one guy did all this horrible stuff, and like everyone kind of just reacts to it in this really, like, for the whole movie, almost the premise of the movie is that he kind of has a guy on the inside of the FBI, and that guy is sort of tamping down any official investigation into him. But at the end of the movie, you really start siding with the new what was it, a prosecutor that shows up who's like, why hasn't anyone done anything to Whitey Bulger? Look at this mess. And you agree with that emotionally as an audience, but like when I kind of thought about it, like, we've got big time skips in this movie, and it got my gears running. It's like, living with this guy, like normalizing this didn't all happen in 2 hours in real life. It was spread out over decades.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like, there's an insidiousness to the character that's really alarming, and the movie understands that. It's done that kind of like bait and switch with you, and so the last third of the movie is it bringing it home, like, hey, look, I know you've gotten to know this guy, audience of the movie, and kind of sympathize with him, like his kid died and all that, but guess what, he's a monster and you really should be scared of him. And it was really cool, and I really enjoyed that.
I would say, because if to give one criticism of the movie, it's like I was enjoying it, I was interested. It's like I never really got that emotionally engaged in the movie, like through most of it, because you are spending so little time with any character that there wasn't a whole lot of suspense in this movie or concern for much of anybody, even like the purely innocent characters like the wives or that kind of thing. You just don't really get to know anybody.
Well, I think the characters you get to know are really Bulger.
Yeah,
and John and John. Say any of them. Yeah, and John Connolly.
You get to spend a lot of time with Connolly.
And I think you also get even though he's not got as much screen time, I think Billy Bulger I think it's like a trinity of characters with them. Do you know what I mean? Where they're the ones that I feel like I got to know the most, if that makes sense. I don't know. So I really like the movie. I sort of, this time around, I did notice some of the things you guys were talking about, where like comparing it to, say, Goodfellas, which also takes place over a long period of time.
Yeah.
But somehow it gets you to sink into these moments where you really get to know different characters and get to spend time with them.
That's a really emotionally investing movie, the way that this wasn't.
Yeah.
It's still good, but
This definitely doesn't do that. This is more, there are moments, like I get to see John Connolly for moments, and I get to piece together everything that's going on, but it isn't that slower pace. It's very frenetic. I don't know if that's a product of it being a newer movie. I know that there were a lot of movies around this time that, like even Doctor Who, if I recall, around this time was kind of doing this thing where it was like, we're going to cram a bunch of stuff into the out, you know what I mean? Like it was, and so I feel like maybe that was part of it. I also think it might have been that they were trying to build the movie around all these set pieces, and that they were, and that the emotional reward of the movie is the set pieces, like, where some kind of really hyper realistic violence is going on, and there's a cool movie soundtrack in the background, and on that level that's where it resonates with me. But I do agree with you, there is kind of this there are spaces where you get to see the character, like I said, like Bulger gets a lot of time, but it is kind of it is missing something there is sort of a more of a but again, I think the trade-off is they got the set pieces, and maybe that's
sure. And saying it's not as emotionally involving as Goodfellas isn't the harshest criticism of a movie either.
But I would say this is more like Scarface, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's more like Scarface, where it's structured around, okay, now is the scene where he falls into the fountain, and it's glorious. That's that.
And you kind of got the tell don't show thing too. They're like, well, after after his son died and stuff, he was never the same. And I'm like, you're telling me that, but I'm not he seems kind of the same through the whole thing
Well,
in a lot of ways.
I feel like I was paying attention to that this time because I kind of felt the
Okay.
same way, and I feel like what you see is he becomes more of a monster both visually and in terms of his behavior after the sun dies. Like he's still a bad guy. He's not a nice guy at the beginning of the movie, but just the stuff he's doing is really ratcheted up after that happens. Do you know what I mean? That's, if I recall, that's the scene where he kills the girlfriend of Stephen Flemmi, right? Is after his son dies. If I have my timeline right.
Yeah,
And that's
a
considered
brutal execution.
well,
too.
and that's the crime everybody always talks about when they try to say how terrible of a person he was, right? So
Yeah.
so I think there's that, but it kind of does lead into one of the reasons why I really like this movie is it's like it's the polar opposite of a lot of this style of crime movie where Johnny Depp, they're not going the Donnie Brasco route of having him like in a very straightforward way play a real person. They're having him play like the monstrous Whitey Bulger. The best way I can put it is the actors are not doing impersonations of the people that they're playing. They're embodying them in a very heightened way. So
you don't hire Johnny Depp because you want a grounded, subtle performance.
Yeah. Though he can give them. I've seen him in movies again.
He's great. That wasn't an insult. I'm just saying, but he likes to go big. I don't know, very dramatic.
This is like Whitey Bulger as Satan, right? Like this is him as like the devil.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
it's for Johnny Depp, it's a fairly restrained performance, I would say. It's not like Tonto or
this is his version of subtle.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's like he's playing somebody that you could see walking down the street, but there's definitely something radiating off this guy that is superhuman, right?
Exactly.
So I like it for that because it's kind of got like all the things I like about horror movies in it as a result. It's got like this villain that really feels like the embodiment of evil, but has also got this comic edge to him. And I think that combination is one of the things that really makes it work. And it's kind of got the cool factor, and not in the way that like a movie like Boondock Saints has it, to name another Boston movie. It's not like that heavy-handed and corny. It's
that's a whole different thing. Yeah.
So, but it's also it's a local movie, and it's whereas Eddie Coyle is a period that is just like before I was even born. This is a period where I'm aware of the stuff, and so it's a little bit harder for me to. I feel like I might be more emotionally invested in the movie because I was aware of like all of the stuff that like I knew why it was so bad that the FBI was working with this guy. Do you know what I mean? It's like that kind of a thing. So I think it might resonate different with the person who just is local and knows more about like all of the headlines than if you're just seeing this for the first time strung together in a series of clips, and it's like, well, I guess that's important for a reason, but I don't necessarily know why. Does that make sense, or is that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I think this movie probably plays different in Boston. Is my judgment of it. It's like, because as a guy who was formerly in the Midwest and is now in Alaska, stuff about Bigfoot plays different to me.
Okay.
It's like I look out my window sometimes and there's a moose there, and it feels like Bigfoot's a bigger threat. And I mean, like, okay, it's kind of a corny comparison.
No, I know what you're saying.
Like,
I know what you're saying.
But yeah, if you look out your window, you can probably see a crime that this guy committed took place.
Yeah, well, it's like watching The Sopranos is different when you live in New Jersey, like I do. It changes things.
But what I'm saying too is like there's assumed knowledge that the movie almost kind of like, I think that you guys are right in your critique, which is I think the movie assumes the audience knows a lot of the details, and it builds the emotional investment off of the people having that knowledge already. And if you don't have that, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, I mean, I agree, but I think Whitey Bulger is infamous enough that it's pretty common knowledge, isn't it?
No, he is. But what I'm talking about is like how, like you were saying how like
the specifics, like
I mean, the specific
thing. When something is local news as opposed to like I knew who Whitey Bulger was sort of, but I remember I mentioned you putting that trailer online and me seeing the trailer of this movie. It's like I was like, I knew Whitey Bulger was a gangster, and that's about all I knew at that point in my life. So,
well, because because the thing is, this story actually happened in two beats in Boston. The whole thing with Angulo getting arrested, that was the first part of the story. And when that happened, John Connolly was hailed as a hero. And there was actually a book called The Underboss, written by, remember the two reporters that eventually come to him and say, and they're the ones that like basically reveal to the world what Connolly is doing with Whitey Bulger. They were the ones who wrote the Underboss book that helped elevate him to a hero. So one of my gripes with this movie is how it makes those two reporters look so good when they wrote Black Mass almost as an apology for...
It's funny you say that, because I don't know, there was just something about that scene that felt like it was glorifying them in a way.
Yes.
I don't know why. Like I couldn't put my finger on it, but like something about this scene feels a little phony to me, and I couldn't quite pick it up.
Yeah, it was definitely phony, and I think it's because, again, and I read both books, and I've always been annoyed that they're perfectly happy to blame. I mean, John Connolly deserves blame for sure, but they're perfectly happy to write about his role, and I don't feel like there's enough. Well, hey, we were kind of, you know what I mean? We were kind of the ones that were, talking about how great this was. That and if you
made a lot of money off of Whitey Bulger's bust.
well, and the other thing is, if you wind it, I mean, it's just speculation, but I feel like the city would have actually been safer if they had left it in the mafia's hands than in the hands of the Irish mobsters, because they were so ruthless. Do you know what I mean?
Well, any turnover too is just going to make things dangerous anyway. It's having one gang swap for another is always going to create a lot of ugliness.
Well, and when you add to the fact that his brother is a state senator who's incredibly powerful, it's just, so I don't quite remember how we got to this point in the conversation, but I feel like all that local knowledge, I think, builds up an emotional weight to the in between spaces between those set pieces. Do you know what I mean? And help string them together. And I feel like it probably, I'm just guessing, but I feel like it probably made for a very different viewing experience than if it's like, Whitey Bulger's a criminal, but you don't have the it's just not, it's news in another state. It's not news in a local situation for you.
Yeah, and I think you can rely more on like a very characterful caricature of Whitey Bulger if you can rely on the audience knowing in the other elements of him from headlines locally. Like, so you can lean into this kind of, I don't want to say cartoonish, this is a fine performance from Depp, but like it is definitely focused around the criminal, like more sellable aspect of Whitey Bulger as monster. And like, you're right, if you didn't, because the movie keeps telling you, like Adam was saying, keeps telling you that, oh, he's so good around town, everyone knows him. But like, if you are from Boston, if these were the headlines you grew up with, that juxtaposition, that shocking juxtaposition, is so much more real, I would imagine, than it was for me just kind of watching this as a movie. Because you're right, I'm not connected to this in the same way you are, Brendan. The movie gets an advantage with you it doesn't have with me. So I don't know if I want to call it a critique of the movie. It was a fine movie, but I definitely feel like it's extra good in your circumstance.
Now, you mentioned the performance of Johnny Depp, so maybe we should talk about the casting and the performances at this point. What did you guys think? How believable were these performances, in particular Johnny Depp's? How believable did you like what you saw in terms of them? Did you like the casting choices?
I really, the casting choices were an interesting blend of inspired and insane in this movie. Benedict Cumberbatch doing a Boston accent, that was fascinating. But like, and the thing that kept striking me, there's a lot of scenes of this in this movie, is you have these really good actors trying to convey the emotion of having a poker face over strong emotion. And that's such it's such a paradoxical place to sit an actor. So they kind of like, there's just all these scenes of just like close-ups of faces of frowning men who clearly are unhappy with what's going on. And they're conveying the hell out of that in a way that they're trying not to convey it while convey it. It's definitely an impressive piece of acting on several actors' parts.
Yeah. It's Yeah, no, and like I said, another actor that was a surprise to having Adam Scott in it. I usually associate him with sitcoms and comedy, so he was fine, and
I
I say it just was one of those unfair things where it threw me for a second, just because I usually expect him to be funny, and he
yeah.
wasn't being funny. What he did was fine, but it
I think I
wasn't
know
even
why
that
they
important
picked
a
him
role.
though.
What?
I think I know why they picked him, because I think for
Why?
that character you needed to not know which direction he was going to be going in terms.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
he does work in that regard. Yeah, yeah. No, that was so. Yeah, like I said, I'm not complaining about the choice. I'm fine with the casting. It just
No, he
was a
stuck
weird
out to
one.
me too. I was like, I remember out because like I said before the podcast, like Step Brothers was like the last movie I think I had seen him in,
Yeah,
or a movie like that. Like he was always in those kind of roles, and he usually kind of played like characters like that, like the jerk brother or whatever. You know, it was
he's
just
really good
like,
at being smarmy. Is
yeah.
a specialty of his. But
Which I don't know, maybe, yeah, I don't know, but it was interesting. I thought the casting was very good. I thought that, again, like I said, I think people embody the characters more than, like, Jesse
yeah,
Plemons does not look like Kevin Weeks, but I feel like he really conveyed that kind of hulking, you know,
Jesse Plemons is really someone it's like for someone that first I was like, oh, it's that guy who looks like Matt Damon.
yeah.
He's just a really good actor in his own right. Every time I've seen him in anything going back to Breaking Bad, I'm always really impressed with what he does. And it's such a small part, but it was memorable despite him doing almost nothing in this movie.
Yeah. And
Yeah, a lot of scenes of him in a car frowning. And yet,
Exactly.
you're right.
But he
He's
frowns. The frown that you're talking about, the frowns are conveying a
yeah,
lot in this movie. Like the scene in the car scene where Bulger comes back with the newspaper revealing that he's a fink. Is that's a great Jesse's reaction. That is great. That was like perfect, kind of trying to hide what you're feeling expression.
there's a lot of that. Well, I mean, and the movie is aware of that. Like, it's aware that that's the situation all these people were in. They all have their knives poised at each other's throats
Yeah.
constantly. And then you have Whitey, who is just barely on top of this pile, just because by dint of the fact he's willing to go a little further and be a little more ruthless than anyone else.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's so wonderfully tense. And
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the tension thing, it's interesting. Like, this is something from the movie, so I don't know how much reality there is to it. But I like the dinner scene that was in the trailer, the one where
Yeah.
the agents are over having dinner. One thing I found interesting, like Bulger is just screwing with the other agent. I forget his name. Where he's got the family recipe thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
oh yeah,
And it was like, he is really scaring that guy, and I felt like you were just setting him up to be someone who's going to turn on you with that, because it's like he's like, whoa, what have I gotten myself into? And even if the feds weren't closing in at that point, he's looking to get the hell out of this situation. So I thought that was a great scene, the way that worked.
I think the actor in that was David Harbour. Am I correct in that?
It is David Harbour's the actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just meant the
Yeah.
character.
But
yeah.
I think and that was an interesting scene. Number one, because it's like a funny scene. Obviously, like there's like it's kind of like the funny house scene
It's
from
a great
Goodfellas,
scene.
you know.
Yeah.
But I like how Whitey Bulger is kind of this lean, smaller character, it's Johnny Depp, and Harbour's much bigger than him. He's a big guy,
yeah.
and then he gets him to be
built.
so afraid. It makes it's kind of like when it just lends weight and credence to him being a terrifying character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's another scene that the acting, like, I can't praise it enough, because it's all quiet facial expressions and staring at each other, and like you can see this little emotional chess game between everyone. It's it's glorious.
And I also thought that dialogue and Johnny Depp's performance in that scene, it was like the reason I shared that trailer, because I think that was the trailer that I shared, is I found that so convincing on like an accent level and on just like sounding like a person from Boston. I don't know if that's what Whitey Bulger sounded like or not, but it sounded like that's how it should sound, and those words all seem like the right word choices to me for what he's trying to do in the scene. So I thought that was, I don't know, it's just a very authentic sounding performance to me, an authentic sounding dialogue. So I think that on that level as well. Like what I usually say about Johnny Depp in this movie, and not that my cousin Dave is in any way similar to Whitey Bulger, but he looks and sounds a lot like my cousin Dave to me, which is the thing. Like that's what makes it be like, okay, I feel like that means this is like a genuine movie, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know what Joel, what you had said something about Benedict Cumberbatch's Boston accent. I was just curious what you.
Okay, so I've seen Cumberbatch in a lot of stuff. For a while, he was cropping up and everything. He was in a Star Trek movie. You know, he was both Sherlock Holmes and Doctor Strange. And I'm not saying he's miscast. I think he's a fine actor. But like, remember that comedy sketch you sent me, Brendan, a while ago, where it was like an SNL
Boston accent,
fighting with the accent, and they had the one British actor who just could not get it, and like he would keep doing outtakes. He was just cursing and his charming colloquialisms, and he's just because they tried so hard, and they have to go from British to American, which is one jump, and then from American to super American, which is Boston. Like every time they try to plumb down into it, it's just like it's reaching deeper and deeper down, and it's hard to keep up. And I'm certain that as an actor, especially one of Cumberbatch's magnitude, it had to be really frustrating to balance the emotional resonance of that with this extremely regional specific and incredibly recognizable accent. You could see the plate spinning in every scene where that's clearly taking a lot of his focus and energy just to remind himself he has it, because it seems like at the end of certain sentences he's like, oh yeah, I'm Bostonian.
Yeah, well, I think I noticed I was paying attention to the accents, and I noticed he was number one. I have heard that Northeast accents are actually the hardest ones for people from Britain to imitate for some reason among American
accents. It's like how Americans can't do Australian accents. I can only think of one actor who's ever convincingly played an Australian, but
fake Australian accent. Does that count?
What?
I can do a fake Simpsons-esque Australian
I think
accent.
that's what Adam is talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
The whole I see you play Knife and Scooby before.
Fake version. It's like the fake American Irish accent that doesn't sound at all Irish, but every American does it when they do an Irish accent.
Yeah, I think Cumberbatch. I think number one, I thought his acting is the thing that really kind of the accent didn't matter much to me because he did a good job with the acting.
Yeah, when you compare it to the acting itself, it's really a minor issue. But now that I'm watching him with an actual Bostonian, like these are movies about Boston, starring people from Boston, it's starting to stand out to me way more.
And I think because a lot of the other actors did nail the accent, it jumped out that he's dropping the R in the wrong word. Do you know what I mean? Like things like that, like that stuff I was mentioning last time. And also, I think he came off as doing like a Kennedy style accent, and again, maybe Billy Bulger like faked a Kennedy style accent. I don't know.
I was gonna say that was actually one thing I was wondering, is the fact that he is trying to be the more upwardly mobile person. It's like, well, people do shift their accents sometimes.
They do, and I can't say that I've seen Billy Bulger talk a lot, so I don't really have a good.
No.
But I thought it was odd that like, well, they're both from the same place, and one brother sounds like Kennedy and one brother sounds like and again, it's not that the Kennedy accent, like I don't think of that as like I don't think that's like that's not like a super high level accent. I just think that's like
I think the Kennedys kind of legitimized it a little bit.
Yeah. It became a high level accent because of
accidental accent
because of the president.
But like I don't hear anybody that talks that way anymore at all. Like that's not like I have not heard that accent in ages, unless I go like further north or something, you know.
Unless I travel to people that actually have that accent, I rarely hear it.
But yeah, so I don't know, but yeah, I thought that I agree with you. His was the one that kind of stood out. I thought Johnny Depp did a great job. I thought what's his name? John, is it Edgerton? Is that how you pronounce his name? The guy who played John Connolly?
I don't know how to pronounce it, but he's really good.
Yeah, I thought he was great in the role, and I thought he did a good job with the accent. Kevin Bacon, was so. But like I give Kevin Bacon a lot of leeway with it's Kevin Bacon.
One thing you get with movies, of course, is the more high profile an actor is, the less they have to do the accent. Yeah. So like I said, Joel Edgerton or whatever, he has to do the accent right because he's not a huge name. Whereas Kevin Bacon, one thing too with movies, when with casting as an actor, you usually don't do the accent during the audition because that's stupid. And you're thinking, if you're going for a job, you're not going to like learn the accent to do an audition for a job you might not get. So a lot of times when people are cast, they don't know. You cast Cumberbatch, and you're like, okay, then you work with a coach afterwards, and maybe you get it right, maybe you don't. But it's always a complication in movies because no one's going to try and do the accent before they have the job.
Yeah, and that makes sense, honestly.
Yeah.
And some accents are really difficult if you like naturally speak one. Like you said, I don't even know if I could actually peg an authentic Australian accent if I heard it.
It's hard as an Australian because I've mastered my American accent. It's actually hard for me to go back to it.
Yeah,
because there's some divide between the two on the way you use your mouth.
Once you lose an accent, it's really hard to get it back because an accent is like an unconscious thing.
Yeah.
And the moment you make it conscious, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's definitely true. I lost my Boston accent. I know Joel accused me of having it last week, but like I moved to California.
You have a Boston accent right now.
I'm not speaking with the. I like trust me.
See, that's you're in the situation with my father has an Australian accent to anyone that's an American, but he does not have
around here
accent to an Australian.
Around here, I do not have a Boston. Like people would not say, "Oh, you're from Southie," or "Oh, you're from Lynn." I don't have one, but I spent 5 years as a kid in California, and I lost the accent. And it's very hard to even like I can't just.
I swear that we have to have some listeners that aren't from Boston that are hearing what I'm hearing here.
We
probably have some Bostonian listeners who are like, "Who's that guy with the Southern accent?" Because I've got just enough of one.
I feel
in Tennessee, people are like, "What's your accent all about?" And I'm like, "I don't have an accent." And then I come up to Alaska, and everyone's like, "I love your Southern accent."
I think
really
that's what's
weird.
going
It's
on
so
here.
Canadian
I think you're hearing my like a little Northeastern accent here,
which
is not the same.
Northeastern accent. I can't speak on the Boston thing,
but Boston is very different. Like at the end of the last episode, I actually had my mom in a clip.
Yes, okay,
and that's a Boston accent. That's a Boston accent. So all right. So one of the other things I want to talk about with this one is I one of the themes I enjoy in the movie, and I think it's kind of similar to this is like the anti Donnie Brasco, where Donnie Brasco sort of is a law enforcement guy who dips into the criminal world and doesn't get like they play with the idea of him getting corrupted with it, but ultimately he wasn't, and in reality he was not. Definitely, if you read the book Donnie Brasco and know about the case. But this is the opposite. This is an FBI agent who, he doesn't go undercover, but he is working with the criminal underworld, and he is totally corrupted by it and gets involved with it to the point that he's convicted of murder, which is, that's incredible, So I thought that was, I like the way that the movie sort of handled. I like as the movie goes on, his world starts to shrink and things start to tighten around him, and this lifestyle and space that he's built for himself slowly closes in as people become aware of what he's actually doing and that he's not such a nice guy. And I don't know, I really liked the way I know that we did say earlier that the movie kind of jumps around a lot and stuff like that, but one area of this movie where I feel like you really do get to know the character is John Connolly kind of struggling with that, like the squirming out, like realizing he's gotten into this situation and then realizing there's like no way out of the situation, and never really kind of you can tell that he sort of believes what he's doing. It's like a character study. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't sympathize. Like we definitely agree with the guy that Joel was talking about, but I have a good sense of like where this character is coming from. Do you know what I mean? He's not just a caricature.
He's able to justify his actions to himself.
Yeah.
And it's only whenever he's confronted with the reality of what he's doing by his wife and like just situations he finds himself in that it really begins to dawn on him that his justifications were lies.
Well, he's not that good at it, to be honest. That scene with the prostitute or the prostitute, he's just throwing random stories that all contradict each other, and just like, geez, you really really didn't think this through ahead of time.
But what's great is those are all the same stories that he's been saying. He's been saying stuff like that the whole movie, and they weren't landing that ridiculously. But then in that scene, you finally get this clear-headed guy who's like, "Wait, those are ridiculous reasons that you're giving me," and that's what I like about that scene, because it's this moment of clarity that is. It really highlights like just how deep this guy is gone, and how out of touch with reality he is, and how like he's delusional basically at that point about what he's doing. He's either delusional or he's just he's so caught up in that world that he's willing to go there, but
it's interesting because basically it's like he was able to keep him safe when there was a big fish to catch that wasn't Bulger. When Bulger became the big fish, it's like, what can he offer up that's as good as bringing in Whitey Bulger? It's like it's like he can't, he could kind of get people on the other trail, and he's like, look, we'll get the mafia. It's gonna be great. But
he really got hoisted by his own petard there.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he engineered his doom. You're right. Because the second that he cleared out the rivals of Bulger, Bulger moves in.
A new prosecutor comes in. He's like, oh, there's my target.
Well, there's an interesting line of dialogue too when he's trying to convince Kevin Bacon, who's like the head of the office there, of the plan to work with Whitey Bulger, and I think Kevin Bacon was the FBI director. I don't know what his official title was in the job, but he's basically saying, look, this guy's like an ex-con. He participated in these LSD experiments 50 times. He's not they're listing all the and John Connolly's reason for, like, one of his big reasons why this is going to work and why they can trust Bulger is because he grew up with Bulger, and that's a bond that isn't broken. And the FBI director should have immediately realized, wait a second.
Yeah, but it's like, but it's worth it. It's worth it to make that compromise because he got the big arrest there. So that's good enough to get Kevin Bacon apparently got promoted up the chain. That's why the other guy moved in. So it worked fine for him.
So Kevin Bacon really made out like a bandit in this movie.
Yeah, he got
clearly
the
being terrible
of all the wrongdoing without getting a single bit of dirt on him. So
because obviously John Connolly in this movie is the guy who is the most. It makes total sense why he goes to jail at the end, right? But it does feel like there are a lot of people who are not. And I don't know, maybe he was. I don't remember. I did read the book Black Mass back when it came out, but I don't remember the details well enough. So maybe Kevin Bacon's character in real life ended up in trouble in some way. But just going by the movie, it looks like a lot of people didn't get held to account for what they and again, it's a movie, so they might be glossing over things and that sort of
we
thing.
know they're glossing over things.
I mean, go ahead.
I've noticed that, I think they don't gloss over a lot is the brutality of some of these executions, and they really are executions.
No, they did. Okay, so I know he mentions pulling teeth in one of the scenes, but their standard routine was to pull teeth after they killed somebody, and I think this movie could have been more brutal. It could have shown the pulling of the teeth. It could, it definitely is brutal, but there's. The reality is probably worse, just based on documentaries I've seen and things like that.
Okay, so what was the logic behind pulling teeth out of a corpse?
Because they can't identify the body if you pull out the teeth. Because they used to go by dental records. If anybody's interested in this, Kevin Weeks has given a number of interviews, and you can find them on YouTube and stuff, I'm sure, where he talks about how all these murders were done and everything. They go, this information is there's a lot, and I think what was his name? There's also a really long interview with John Martirano, the hitman guy. I think he gave a hour-long interview to 60 Minutes or something.
Wow, dude.
So there's a lot of stuff like that where that information is out there. But yeah, I thought that was why they pulled the teeth was because it was pre DNA. I think I don't think they were doing DNA on cases at that time. So dental records.
Yeah, I mean, this
was
is
a big
like
one.
the late 70s, early 80s. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I think dental records would be like the thing du jour for recognizing the skeleton that you happen to dig up.
But
in
that
the
also
80s.
that also shows like how like when you're pulling teeth out of a person, that's like so dehumanizing, right? Like that's the point where it's like this person is just a body now to them. Do you know what I mean? Like there's something really grim about that, I think.
It is. And you're right. It's not just murder, which is, morally revolting enough. It's this complete like disregard for any element of the sanctity of life. Like they don't even get to be buried with any dignity. You're ripping their teeth out and hucking them in an unmarked grave.
I mean, corpse desecration is a huge taboo, just for a reason. It's just, it just goes deep. But
yeah, I don't know. But that, I think it's definitely a violent movie. It's definitely a violent movie.
Yeah, I say that one violent scene. I don't know. Maybe I'm. Basically the scene where they execute the highlight guy in the parking lot.
Oh yeah.
Which one? Because two of them get executed in a parking
the
lot.
one by the swimming pool where you see everyone jump out of the pool and
and
I was like, I know the usual thing when there's a gunshot nearby is, was that a gunshot or was that a firework or a car? It's like people don't immediately go, unless it's clear that there's a gun. They wouldn't be able to see anything from them.
Yeah.
Like, would everyone really jump out of the pool?
Yeah,
if anything, too, I'd probably like hide down at the edge of the pool if I was convinced.
I didn't see anything, Mr. Hitman.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like because when gunshots are fired, like if you live in a city and you've heard you don't always know.
I lived in Chicago for 10 years. I've heard gunshots.
This execution happened in Florida. These people have heard gunshots before.
Yeah,
but that scene was well shot. I thought because they have the hitman.
It's a well done scene.
Yeah.
I'm just making a little.
I love how they have the camera behind him and he's walking up to the car.
Yeah,
that was really good. There were a couple of scenes like that. I like the scene when I forget the guy's name, but one of his first. There was the guy who like mouthed off to Bulger at the at their hangout that night, and then they end up killing him. They shoot him in the back of the head when Bulger's shaking hands with him. But the scene where he gets in the car and he thinks they're going to take out somebody, and he puts on the bulletproof vest. I like the way that the guy in front hands them both guns. I don't know why, but the fact that like they're gonna kill this guy, but they still give him a gun so that he thinks that he's in on the, little things like that. I thought were just nice because I didn't notice it the first few times I watched the movie, and then this time I'm like, oh, they're giving him the gun.
I hadn't thought about that till you mentioned it. So you're right. The first time you just don't quite pick up on it.
They most effectively disarmed him by arming him. That's
I thought it was kind of like it's just it's like a really well executed, plan, I guess would be the way to put it. But I and also the other parking lot scene I thought was pretty brutal. That one was actually more vicious when he shoots what was his name? Holleran, the Peter Sarsgaard's character.
Oh yeah, he shoots him and he goes down and he's like blubbering and begging for his life and he's just like pumping round after round into him.
I could be wrong, but I believe the guy that was in the car with him was totally uninvolved with any criminal activity too. I don't know if that's the case.
Shot.
I just know that there was a case around a restaurant where two people got shot and one of them was not involved. And in an interview with Kevin Weeks, he had said something like, well, you shouldn't hang around with those types of guys because you might get shot. That was kind of how he justified it. But that scene, the thing that was interesting about that scene is they shot it at the Porthole Pub in Lynn, right? Which, Adam, when you were here, I think I took you to Nahant and to Linway. That's like right between Nahant and Lynn, the Porthole Pub.
Oh, okay.
In reality, I think that murder actually happened in Boston at Anthony's Pier 4 or something. I could be wrong, but I thought it was an interesting because the thing about that geographic knowledge that surprised me is I was like, wait, that's way out. I was like, that's way outside of Southie. Why are they doing that there? When I saw it, and then I found out later that they moved it just for the location purposes. But I don't know. I thought that was that was a scene that stood out to me just in terms of. Because it just felt stylized where you have Bulger walking up with the shotgun and pumping the guy and but I thought it was an effective scene.
It is, and I think scenes like that, because that happens a little later in the movie, like scenes like that usually have some tragedy in Bulger's life or something like some turning point in his life, and then like it's bookended with an even more violent or more horrible thing he does. And I think that's actually a pretty effective way this movie does convey his arc as a character. So, and again, we're hitting the highlights of his life, but whenever they highlight it that way, there's kind of an emotional continuity to it that I thought was admirable structure-wise.
Yeah, and I definitely do agree with you that it does have a highlight. It's almost like a montage type film, right? Like that's why I think Scarface is the best. I know Scarface literally has the montage in the middle, but also the whole movie is kind of like going from beat. Like it's one of the reasons why I like Scarface actually is it does a good job of that.
Super watchable.
Yeah. But it definitely does do this thing where it's like, okay, now's this scene, now, it's all these little set pieces that just really cinematic.
Yeah, De Palma's really good at that, I would say. And
I feel like this is more that style of movie. Oh, one thing we didn't talk about was Irish versus Italian. That was that's obviously a big thing in this movie. I don't know, did that work for you here? Did you have any thoughts on that one?
It feels a little undersold. Because I thought it was going to be like a bigger chunk of the movie, because like one of the first things that happens is that like Italian hitman has the little Italian flag on his scooter, and he scoots up to the guy and he executes him and he scoots away, which is like the most Italian hit I've ever seen.
Also, I think he was on a motorcycle. I don't think he was on a scooter, that guy, but they shot it like
I keep making it more.
He didn't have a Vespa.
That was the thing, because
over his shoulder.
I watched it 2 days ago and I thought it was a Vespa, and then when I watched it today, I was like, they couldn't possibly have been on a Vespa, and I'm sure enough it was like a motorcycle. So I think something about the way they shot it made it feel like he was on a Vespa.
Well, the Italian sticker on there, the Italy sticker on there, and you're like, it just makes it into a Vespa.
Gotta be a Vespa now.
But well, I don't know if we're gonna get to the Italian. Well, I'll go on. Actually, I'll save this for later.
Now we're all super intrigued.
Yeah, now I want to know what Adam was gonna say.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was getting into planning the next podcast. We're not even.
Okay.
Okay. Well, stay tuned.
So Joel, did you have anything else that you were
at home
on that?
As far as like the Italians versus the Irish, I mean, like it's weird. Like that's like a lot of Boston movies have that as like a thing. Like we mentioned Boondock Saints. It's another one where it's
that's a big Irish movie. Yeah,
Irish versus.
This movie has the IRA in it, right? The IRA is a big thing in this movie. I mean, obviously that's a real event.
I'm certain that's based on like a real event in Bulger's life, but it felt weird that it got connected to me. Like maybe I don't get the context.
I think what they were trying to do is a lot of I don't want to speak. Okay, number one, there's definite like ethnic lines are much more like for groups where ethnicity isn't really relevant anymore or still more pronounced here. So like if you're Boston Irish, that matters. If you're Boston Italian, that matters.
Irish Americans I knew in the 80s that supported the IRA were a big thing, I remember.
Yeah, and that's a big thing in Boston. I mean, growing up, so I'm actually Irish, Italian, and Jewish. So I'm like all three of the big groups that were on there. But
you got all the stories.
Yeah,
look at you.
But like I was always more like I was raised more on the Italian side. I knew the Italian side more. And among like my Irish relatives, among the Irish people I know, you would hear this admiration for the IRA, not that unfrequently. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just like a pride thing, I think. I don't know how to put it, but I feel like that's what they were connecting to with him supporting the IRA. Number one, they were kind of trying to show like how off the rails this FBI investigation is going, because it's literally funding weapons going to like a terrorist organization. At the same time, I think from another lens, they're trying to show why he's maybe popular. Do you know what I mean? Like why he's not like and I think this kind of gets into the code stuff that we're talking about, because obviously one thing that this movie does is it depicts Bulger obviously as a monster, but he's a monster that lives by a code, and they're always talking about this code. And I feel like scenes like him donating to the IRA, even though, it's obviously he's donating weapons to a group that's going to use them, he's doing it on principle. He's not doing it just for profit, right? So he's obviously got like there's some kind of belief system underlying what he's doing. And I think that the scene where they show him with what was her name? Mrs. Cody, was that the name of the old lady that they helped with the groceries?
Yeah, that's like right after they beat up that guy, right? And leave him for dead. Like they slow down, like, hey, remember her? And they help her with groceries. And it's like this really sweet thing to do. And you're right, there's no profit motive. There's something sinister about it. And I think that the thing that this movie does in terms of like showing his arc is whenever those things draw closer and closer together as he sees more personal failures and more criminal success, it kind of culminates in that dinner scene where there's no line anymore between him being personal and him being this horrifically dangerous criminal. Like they're too polluted now, and his code of honor has become utterly corrupted by what he's become.
I have to say, with the IRA scene, the one thing I mean, it's a cliche to kind of complain about the thing where people walk into a room and then the perfect news story is on when they turn on the TV. But it was like, they're walking into the back room and there being this like documentary or news story about the IRA being on his little TV in the back room. I'm like, it's the early 80s in America. Like the chances of that being on TV are so infinitesimally slim. It just kind of made me laugh.
Yeah, that is fun. Yeah, it's not the internet age where we just summon the news thing that we want to see.
Even VCRs were rare then.
Yeah, but I do think that was in there for that. I think the big reason was to show, hey, like the FBI is effectively helping the
scene itself
fun.
Was fine. It was that aspect of the scene. I was like, come on, guys, that's a little much.
But you do see that's something you see with his character over the movie is like because remember he's talking with there's a policeman named Flynn, who I assume is supposed to be Irish, and he pulls them over and he gives them a message from Angiulo. And I thought that in that scene, I think he says, it's a sad day when a native son, right? So he's obviously there is like this pride thing going on, and there is this sense of like, I guess you could call it like Southie nationalism almost, like this sense of pride.
This is a Southie nationalist movie. How strange to think about.
But like it's but you know what I mean. But that is like a theme. Like Joel, you were asking me about the podcast about like the code and all that stuff and how that comes up in these movies a lot. I think a lot of that is cinematic. Number one, I do think like people have attached this idea to Boston of everybody adheres to like you see, like we should do The Departed because I have a lot of opinions about that one too. But that plays a big there's a big scene in that movie where there's a guy who I think disappears because he was killed, and they go to his mother's house and the police are trying to find out like if she knows anything, and the mother says he probably did something he shouldn't have done, right? Like that's how far this code of silence, and I found that very unrealistic. I think somebody's mother would be beside herself with anger and grief and would be reacting like a normal person. I also think what they don't capture is there is a split in Boston over this issue. There definitely is like a snitches get stitches mentality here. There definitely is like a whole thing with loyalty and all that stuff that's real. But at the same time, there's always been critics of that, especially when it involves people like Whitey Bulger. So like something that they didn't get into in this movie is there's like a right-wing talk show, or I shouldn't say right-wing, they're conservative. I don't listen to him, so I don't know where he falls on the spectrum. But there's a guy named Howie Carr who was an antagonist of Billy Bulger and Whitey Bulger, and had a radio show and wrote about them. And at some point, I think Whitey Bulger and Kevin Weeks were actually planning on killing him because of that. Oh. But there's always been people that have objected to, and Mayor Menino. You guys probably know who Mayor Menino is. He was very against the whole, like they used to sell Snitches Get Stitches T-shirts in Boston, and he tried to get them eradicated. So it's not as simple as they make it out in the movies, but it is like a real thing. There definitely is like this, there is like this thing with that code that.
Well, I mean, like everything that winds up in Hollywood, eventually they take like the Cliff Notes version and they sort of make their own mythology for it, and that's the thing. Like it's based on a kernel of truth, but it's also like what they're showing you is the product of a bunch of writers saying, what's the emotion that Whitey's feeling in this scene? Like that's what's going on there. And so they develop this cohesive thing around it. But real codes of honor, real culture doesn't work that way. It's far too organic and messy, and it's far too personal when people interact with it. It's not something you can just box.
Yeah, the whole thing of Bulger coming up with, oh well, I'm not informing, I'm doing this other thing. It's just BS. It's like trying to keep your code but not follow your code.
Well, you know what's interesting? I used to read a lot of like a lot of true crime books, especially ones that were written by like people that were involved in crime. Like, so you'd have like a person who used to be an underboss in a family write a book, or somebody who was a hitman or whatever. They would always write these books, and they would always say like, I'm not a, they would say what he said. They would say, you know, like, I didn't turn my back on the code. They turned their back on me, or it's always kind of recast like that. But again, I think that's because I think not even to do with Boston, just if anybody's involved in a criminal underworld, there's obviously like there is a code that would be, that would not be friendly to people that are informants with the police. So, that's why.
It's just a natural defense mechanism of being on the wrong side of like the tyranny of government, which is like, they have the legitimate monopoly on violence, therefore they make the rules. And if you're on the other side of that, you have to make the punishment for obeying the greater tyrant worse than the tyrant would make it. I read too much Hobbes. You know what?
Yeah, that's a really unusual way to say. I know what you're saying, but
I think of these things in really weird stark terms, like, because like that's the thing about governments, like they're just the biggest monster in the room. And like we as Americans, like I think that we don't know how good we have it in terms of government. Like we have this wonderful system of like all these weighty balances, and it makes anything that's really draconic about the power of government a lot. It impacts us so much less that we have like whole political parties that are devoted to not being taxed, which is kind of insane when you think about how reality works and how inevitable taxes are as they're compared to like death and taxes, right? Those are the two things. But yeah, it kind of disguises the fact that we have this unbelievably monstrously powerful government, and they can kind of just do whatever they want except for all of these balances that keep them in place. But yeah, like when you're talking about a criminal or any organization, like criminal organization, business, whatever, it's all just incentives to make people behave in ways they wouldn't normally behave. And so like when you're in a situation like that, like game theory style, where there is a terrible punishment for doing what you're doing, if you're in charge of the organization as a manager, you've got to make sure that you're creating an atmosphere where it is worse to do the legitimate thing than it could possibly be to get out of the lifestyle. And that's why these movies, like, they don't have to really dramatize how miserable the end of a criminal and an organized crime thing is. Like everyone winds up dead. Everyone's at the end of it is just miserable and burned out. Like think about Whitey Bulger. For all of his criminal success, he loses a son, he loses his marriage, he never gets to in any way help this IRA organization that he's trying to send weapons to. Everything he tries to do personally, he's a miserable failure at. He can't even like talk to his brother, like nothing. And that's like the actual outcome of the wages of his life of sin and crime.
Which again, that is like a movie trope of criminals, where
it is, but it also really happened.
Yeah, no,
it's a true story.
No, but also let's look at it this way: he was on the run and free for a long time before he was caught. You know, so like there is one. You guys had mentioned how this movie doesn't maybe get into specifics enough, and I think that's one area where things aren't illuminated well by the film, where it doesn't get into what these people were actually doing. To, like they show the murders, right? Like they show the murders they were committing to silence people who were going to speak against them in some way. But they don't show what these guys were doing on a daily basis to earn money and why that was such a bad thing. And like, I think if they had done that, it would have, because like my understanding is one of the big things they would do is extort local businesses. And so people would have a small business and they would show up and say, look, you got to pay us this amount of money now. And that you can, that's the kind of thing that allowing this to rampantly spread did to the community. Do you know what I mean? That's the okay, like I don't know if you guys know this. You know Dana White of the UFC? You know the UFC. You know the UFC, right?
I know the UFC.
Okay. So,
I know the name Dana White, but I don't.
So he's the bald guy who's kind of personable and is like the face of the UFC, basically.
Okay.
And so, but the reason that he was originally in Boston and was a boxing instructor, and the reason he left was because the Winter Hill Gang or some people from Whitey Bulger's group went to him and said, that they wanted him to pay like $2,500 a week for being able to teach boxing, and he didn't. I guess he didn't take it seriously at first, and then he got a call on a Saturday that said, "You owe us $2,500 by Sunday, or something's going to happen to you." And he immediately went to Las Vegas and left Boston, and that's kind of how he went on the path of doing the UFC, I guess. But just to show, I mean, the like, you know, just that they had that kind of effect even on this random minor celebrity from the UFC. Do you know what I mean? That's the, you know, so I think if they had shown more of that,
I don't know how sexy that is in terms of like putting it as a scene in a movie.
Yeah.
You know, like choking a teenage girl to death because she might have been an informant.
Yeah.
And she's a loose end. That's sexy. You can put that in a movie and be like, look how horrible it is.
Yeah.
But that kind of, like you're talking about, that day-to-day crime, that's horrible.
Yeah,
you know, that crushes small businesses.
I think if you
whole communities.
The problem with showing that is, in order to give it the weight that it needs, you almost need to build up the characters that are being affected. So you would have to, the small business owners that are getting extorted, we have to learn about them, and we have to see them like amassing
I watched Peaky Blinders a couple years ago, like a couple seasons of it, and one thing I didn't like about that was they were just kind of they show a lot of the violence these people do, but there's also this feeling that they're the underdog, that they're fighting the man, and this kind of thing. And I'm like, but every racket they're running, it's like they're extorting small businesses. It's like, and the show just kind of seemed to be like pushing that aside a lot of the time. And it's like, no, but because they're these Irish gypsies, they're the heroes. And it was just like, no, they're just killing and robbing other people at the bottom of the barrel. They're not taking on the man.
I think the best gangster movies are even gangster movies that celebrate and exalt in the violence of it and even glorify it. The best ones are at least ambivalent about the morality of what's going on. I think the best example of it is Goodfellas. Goodfellas is a perfect example of, you can tell in the back of Scorsese's head, he's like, there's something, you know, this is not like, there's like hell is constantly creeping up on these characters, right? Like there's literally, like there are scenes that are vivid and look like they're in a hellscape, right? And so I think that you kind of need that nagging. I think this movie does do that, but there's
a sense of it being kind of a doomed journey.
Yeah, well, a doomed journey and a sense of like, just you really get a sense of how bad the corruption aspect of it is, of how the FBI enabling a kingpin to just spread is a bad thing. But you know, but again, my only point was that, you know, if I think if you had seen on the ground level the effects, aside from like you said, the sexy stuff, but like just how day to day it can affect, like, you know, it affects people, like, you know, running small businesses, that kind of thing. It would have had, you know, additional weight maybe.
Well, they also get into like him bringing in all the drugs into the community. And so they do kind of.
But again, that was that was the tell. And again, I guess they kind of had to, because if they wanted to show it, the downside of that is we're gonna have to spend 20 minutes learning about this.
They didn't have the time to. That goes back to my comment at the very beginning. It's like, this would have been absolutely fantastic if they had like a premium season on like HBO or something. To do this, then it would have been they would have been able to make this perfect. But they were crunched.
But I think that's why going the Scarface direction was the right call, because it would have been a 4-hour movie to do all those things.
Exactly. I think I have issues, but I understand why they made all the choices they made with this movie.
Well, and the choices they made them in a smart way, because like I mentioned earlier, they escalate how horrible the crimes that we see are in each scene, just enough that you feel that toad in the boiling water vibe, you know. That's, if you're going to go the Scarface direction, that's how you have to do it, to show just how far Whitey falls. So, well constructed for that. There's criticism, I think, to be laid at the movie's feet. I think you're right. I think the shows that actually show the day-to-day horror of living with like a kingpin or living in a society being manipulated, coerced, and bled dry by one. Like those are the ones that really kind of haunt you. And this is a little bit too much. Like I could just walk away from it afterwards. It's like, that was kind of a true crime thing. Time to go back to my normal life. My grandmother reads true crime novels, and that she does in that same way. It's an indulgence once in a while. It doesn't have that same lingering horror.
No, like The Wire, where you have 5 seasons where you get to see all the horror of every institution and crime organization in Baltimore, where they can take their time and just let you wallow in how horrible everything is. Like,
but see, that
is much more crushing.
But the thing is, I think there's 2 kinds of crime movies, right? There's the wallowing crime movies. Like, I guess Breaking Bad might pretend. I don't know if it would fall on that side of the fence or not. I think it would.
Wallow's not the right word anyway.
But you know what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying. It's not as glamorous as like there's a glamorous type of gangster movie, and then there's like the more you're gonna look at the morality in the face type of gangster movie, and the glamorous ones are obviously more fun. Do you know what I mean? They're just more entertaining in general.
This movie was more fun than Eddie Coyle, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Eddie Coyle better. I think that's a better movie. I like that better. But if you just want to sit down and watch a movie, this is, assuming you've got a tolerance for violence, this is a pretty enjoyable movie.
Eddie Coyle was a movie that made me really think. It also it was very serious. I think movies like this, movies like Goodfellas, Scarface. Those types of movies they're much more cathartic in their use of violence.
Yeah.
Eddie Coyle was much more depressing in its use of violence. This is a much more cathartic. Again, it almost celebrates it, but it doesn't quite go. They stop just short of celebrating it. Is how I would put it.
Eddie Coyle refuses to give you any catharsis whatsoever.
Yes,
it's like nope.
Yeah, the way I would put it is when violence happens in Eddie Coyle, you do not want it to happen. And when violence happens in Black Mass, you absolutely want it to happen. You want it, like, you know what I mean? It's even when it's horrible, that's why you're there. You're there to see the violence, right? So
it kind of sells itself on the extremity. I will say though, of the 2 movies, I just got done watching Black Mass, right? Friends of Eddie Coyle is still right now much more vibrant in my head.
Yeah,
Friends of Eddie Coyle. I think it's a better movie. I do think it's a better movie. There are movies, like I would definitely say I think Goodfellas was better than Eddie Coyle, but I think Eddie Coyle is better than Black Mass.
Yeah, that is
one of those masterpieces.
Yeah.
But Eddie Coyle I was really pleasantly surprised watching that one. That one, because I didn't know what I was going to get, and I didn't know how bored I was going to be, and I was very glad that I was thoroughly enjoying myself. And this one thing that I will say about Black Mass that I didn't like this time around was it did feel a little bit dated in that it felt very much like, this was a 2015 movie. Do you know what I mean? It had that, some of that was the casting, some of that was the style of the cinematography and stuff like that. But it did kind of like, and that's not always bad, but like, I did sort of think to myself, I wonder how this would look if it was made 2 years earlier or 2 years later, which is not a thought I had watching Eddie Coyle. Do you know what I mean?
There's a lot of forgettable cinematography in this movie, which was unfortunate because like the scenes you were pointing out where like we're on like the camera, like shoulder over camera, following people and things like that. Those were great. Those stuck out beautifully. But then you compare them to what was that? Was it Casino? That one extended long shot where they just went into.
Oh, that was Goodfellas, where they went into
Goodfellas. That's what it was.
The Coco Cabana scene. Yeah.
I think that scene, that shot, established the precedent of that being an expectation in these kind of movies. And what we saw in those scenes, in those little over-the-shoulder scenes, were just this really tiny little echo to that. Almost like they were a little tip of the hat, The reason they didn't have quite the artistic brilliance.
The reason that scene works in Goodfellas, though, is because it's totally in line with the movie's purpose, which is to show you like the inner workings of the mafia. And so you're getting that's like we're going to take you into the hallways of and see every detail of how
flash for flash's sake. It's flash applied with very strong intent.
And
it's not like it's early in the movie. It's like right in the middle, isn't it?
The movie Goodfellas starts in the middle. It starts with the Billy Batts scene where Billy Batts is in the trunk of the car and he starts to jump around. That's where the movie starts. I don't know. I suspect. I have to admit, I kind of liked a lot of like I know I was complaining about location shots before, but I kind of liked the location shots they were doing in this movie. I felt like it helped me to build atmosphere.
Someone that is only, a casual Boston visitor on a regular basis, I enjoyed the locations in this movie.
They had a lot of shots that were like the opposite of a glamour shot. Like they have this one shot where it's just like this awkward upward angle at this tangle of electric wires, and it's clear that like that one shot is like, yeah, Boston's a city they had before electricity, so this is just kind of what they stapled together. And it's such a characterfully Boston shot. I was like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to mention that on the podcast.
I didn't even notice that shot, to be honest.
That's because you look up and see it every day.
It's probably why. Yeah. But the
I remember Brendan, our mutual friend Rob, describing like the streets of Boston. It's just they're all just the old cow paths. That's the whole organization of the city. There was a cow path there. Let's put a road in.
Yeah, yeah. The streets here. Well, also there's like in the areas around Boston, there's a lot of hills, so you get like the San Francisco type thing going on too. But I think one thing that did stick out to me is. Again, we keep talking about the Boston accent trailer, but I did think about that a lot because they talked about name dropping locations, and I felt like there was a scene where he's like the Libra in Revere, I was talking to somebody at the Libra in Revere and blah blah blah, and I remember thinking to myself like, if you live in a place, you don't say the Libra in Revere, you just say the Libra, right?
Yeah, you just say the Libra.
Yeah,
even Kevin Smith movies get that right. Pointing that out.
So I thought that was sort of, I mean, again, I understand why they do it, but it did kind of stand out like, oh, okay, they're kind of like, we're just going to drop names of places now.
Isn't that right, audience? You've heard of that place, haven't you?
But yeah, so I don't know, I think we've talked about as much of this movie as we can. I don't know if there's anything we left out.
I think I've said all I have, but
yeah, that's pretty much everything. I think we wanted to mention, like, 'cause I noticed that this movie it does a good job of conveying the attitudes of the characters by how it chooses to put people in the movie and where it chooses to put them. I noticed very early that every scene with a woman, she is in a kitchen, almost exactly, and the other ones they're like, she's like a prostitute or something. Like this movie, it takes that very misogynist way that the all male gangsters looked at women, and it codes it as part of the camera's bias. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know if you could do that nowadays, that people just misinterpreting it as an actual bias on the part of filmmakers, but it wasn't. In this case, it was an intentional choice to show the objectification of these people. I thought that was really well put together.
Yeah, we had gotten into this in the before the podcast. I think we should talk about it. The basically all of the women are either like mothers, wives, or prostitutes. There's not like a lot of there's nothing really in between that I can remember. Or old ladies. I guess I don't know, old ladies and mothers may be kind of the same category.
Yeah, that kind of. And you got the maid mother crone thing, and in every one of those cases, it is about their function in terms of the lives and utility to these men.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, and it's clear if you watch the movie with the understanding that that's intentional, it doesn't come off as offensive. It comes off as
and I mean, also you have it's not like the women are completely meek to a degree. Like Connolly's wife, she locks him out of the house. She just changes the locks. Like, yep, I'm done with you.
Yeah,
bye.
There's some subtlety there too, because like not just that, but she refuses to socialize with Bulger, right? And so I mean that's a pretty ballsy thing to do. That's like you have the like notorious gangster in your living room, and you're just gonna go to your bedroom and ignore him. That definitely does seem like something that it wouldn't be easy to do. Also, I thought it was interesting that like the Bulger's mom was there was something a little bit mean about her, in the way that she, so there were like these they weren't like it wasn't like all the old ladies were sweet and all of the wives were like meek but they definitely were I mean, like the scene where when Bulger goes up to check on his wife, right? Like that scene definitely is intended to kind of show, and I think a lot of the movie is intended to show like the effect. And again, because one of the things that people don't like about Bulger is the violence he did to women in particular, right? I think that's one of the reasons why they're taking this angle with the movie. I think that made it stronger. I think that made it, it made more of a case for, that aspect of Bulger. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. Also, I think the time that the movie is set also has something to do with that, because like we could have possibly said the same thing about Eddie Coyle as well, because that was made in the 70s. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But in Eddie Coyle's case, it felt more like they were simply shooting what was naturally there rather than they had this kind of like post-third wave feminist information perspective that they wanted to make certain they were deliberately and carefully inserting into the bias of the camera of the movie. Like,
okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not like women weren't housewives at one point, almost primarily. Like, that's a real fact of history. You can't argue with that. And like with Eddie Coyle, it was just like, yeah, we just put the camera where, we encountered people in our lives. Like men were in bars, women were in kitchens was kind of the thing. And like
also bank tellers.
I almost work exclusively with women in my bank job. So, and I work almost exclusively for women too, because they kick ass
in real
at bank.
estate, which is largely women working in that too. So there you go.
Some manly occupations we got here.
Exactly. Yeah. I think game designer is actually the manliest profession out of all three of us.
I don't know about that. I'd have to give it to I think banking is probably, because at least that's like the bank. Well, that's like it involves the practical, money concerns of running a household. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, but I guess real estate too. Game designer is the most frivolous, actually, of all the occupations.
Frivolous. I got masculinity.
Napoleon once said, "Men are ruled by toys."
But anyways, I think we'll end it here. Hopefully, I don't know. I don't know if we'll keep doing more movies in this style or not. But if we do go in this direction, I would say Departed or Mystic River might be interesting choices, because Departed is also like it's based on Infernal Affairs, but it's also clearly modeling Jack Nicholson's character on Whitey Bulger and modeling Damon's character on John Connolly. So, but it's fictional, so it's interesting to see a fictional take that isn't limited by what actually happened. But yeah, so we'll head out, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.